Eric John Phillips. I'm on radio today with my guest, George Widger, my erudite and eloquent and studious guest, George Widger, on this beautiful March 12th, 2024, which is a Tuesday today. And Brother George, I welcome you to the broadcast.
Well, thank you, Brother Eric. It's always a pleasure to be on with you.
It's always good to have you. You always teach me something, brother. So what do you have for us today, George?
Well, let's see now. Before I begin with the feature presentation, my scripture verse is 1 John 5, verse 21. 1 John 5, verse 21. Little children, keep yourself from idols. Amen. Okay. John the Apostle, when he wrote that, he was not talking to, I don't like this term, kids, young people. He was almost certainly talking to adults. You know, they may have been teenagers. He wasn't talking about people who were, say, children. He was talking about spiritual children. And if that were an issue, if idolatry were a problem 2,000 years ago and before that, it's only got worse since then. Because we have all sorts of distractions and entertainment today in the electronic age with the internet and so forth. I just turned 55 years old. And growing up, I realize you're a little bit older than I am. Growing up, basically, in order to be traumatized, you had to go somewhere. You had to turn on your TV, turn on your radio, or you open up your daily newspaper. Nowadays, you don't even need to get out of bed. You can just look at your phone and say, oh, yes, there was an explosion in such and such place, or so-and-so died. So you don't even need to get out of bed before the trauma-based mind control starts.
That's right.
Yep. And now in terms of say idolatry, we have all sorts of idols, all sorts of icons, all sorts of things we could possibly worship. Athletes, entertainers, movie stars. And I guess the flavor of the month right now is Taylor Swift. And we're assuming she's actually a girl, but in the past there's Marilyn Monroe or Elvis or James Kennedy or almost all who were Catholics or Freemasons. Interestingly enough,
you said Elvis. You said Elvis Presley was a Freemason, right?
Oh yes.
Mm-hmm. Yep, very important. Okay, go ahead, brother.
So, in terms of idols, so anything now. Okay. Now, I played sports growing up. I'm not saying I was particularly good. I played Little League baseball and basketball and cross country. And there's nothing wrong with playing a sport, baseball or whatever. However, the problem is, if you're going to be engaging in those activities, that's fine because it builds, teamwork, a sense of esprit de corps. You exercise, you get fresh air, you get sunshine. Well, not so much in basketball, but you have a sense of accomplishment. However, the problem is that something like sports can be warped when it becomes professional or semi-professional, such as college sports, and people become obsessed with that. You're memorizing statistics, memorizing rosters. Oh, gee, being upset if your team doesn't win, or being happy if your team does win, or if it wins a championship. That's just simply
or another thing, George.
A complete waste of time.
George, these players have a totally destroyed life because they lost the game, or the quarterback threw an interception or something like that. Now their life's destroyed. I mean, who cares? It's just a game. But that's when idolatry comes into play. Yep. Go ahead, George.
Yes, it's not just sports. Okay, and it's not just sports and entertainment. It seems to have spilled over into politics. And that's it.
Yeah, sports fanatics, like the Philly fanatics. Like here in Pennsylvania, they have what's called the Philly fanatics. So they're fanatics. I mean, everything revolves around whether or not you'll win the Super Bowl or whatever, and that gives you a reason to live or die. It's absolute idolatry. The whole sports fanaticism is idolatry. Very well said, George.
Okay. And, that spilled over into politics. Maybe that's been the case for a long time, but this seems to have been true in the Donald Trump era. You have people who adore him. They hang on his every word, and they see him as a secular messiah. He's going to save us from whatever, the alien invasion, or well, when I say alien, you're talking, could be talking about little green men, or you could be talking about people from south of the border. And speaking of politics, I was gonna bring up this last week, I guess on the 7th, President Biden gave his annual State of the Union. Now, traditionally, for decades, the president would give his State of the Union in late January, around about the 20th, ever since they switched it over to that date. And one of the things he brought up was the death of a young college student in Georgia, Laken Riley. Not Lincoln Riley, as he said. She was a 22-year-old nursing student at the University of Georgia at Athens. And she was, I guess, on the 22nd of last month, on my birthday, was out for a jog. And she got accosted by a 26-year-old from Venezuela who wasn't here legally. Jose Abera, I believe, however you say his name. And he hit her over the head, he raped her and killed her. And so I guess the president got some flack when he referred to Abera as an illegal alien. And Nancy Pelosi came out and said, "Oh no, he's an undocumented migrant."
Good old Dame Malta, Nancy Pelosi, with her Jesuit masters, continuing to defend the alien Hispanic Roman Catholic invasion and all their crimes they perpetuate in order to build the new right. Nancy Pelosi's building the new right. But go ahead, brother.
Okay, so that reminds me. I just read this yesterday. I haven't looked into this, but last November there was a local community college instructor. I don't remember his name, but he was a 74-year-old retired or part-time instructor at the local community college who got busted for carrying a gun on campus because he'd been packing for years. Well, I didn't find this out, but it is illegal in California to bring a firearm onto a government school campus, K-12, college, and university. So he's looking at up to 2 years in prison. He was fired from his position, and he's looking at a couple of years behind bars. He didn't brandish it. I'm not sure how it came about, but some students, I guess, said they saw his firearm when it fell out of his briefcase. So I guess they phoned the campus police and they arrested him. And as I said, he lost his job, and now he's looking at a couple of years behind bars. And
because the most horrible thing you can do is to use a gun to stop a criminal from committing a crime, because they want the papacy, the Jesuits want as much crime as possible, as many victims as possible, to justify the establishment of martial law out of Proclamation 2040 of March 9th, 1933. That's the end game here. So anybody that stops crime from being committed is really opposing the establishment of the new right.
Yes, indeed. You're talking about the new right. Interesting you should bring that up, because there's a movie that just came out, I guess last month. It was called God and Country. The director is Dan Partland. Now, Parched Land. I couldn't find anything on his background in terms of his religious affiliation. Now, Partland is the director. The producer is Rob Reiner, son of Carl Reiner. And I know we've talked about the Reiner family before. Now, Carl is German Jewish. I mean, he was of German Jewish descent, and he got his undergrad degree from Georgetown University from the Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service. So Carl's son is Rob, and he's probably best known, for people from our era, as Meathead, Michael Spivak on the old TV show All the Family. Now, he later made a name for himself as a director. He did A Few Good Men, Spinal Tap, When Harry Met Sally, Stand By Me, a number of films that are considered classics. Not really, but by the time they're considered by the communists to be classics.
And they're considered classics by the socialist, communist, Jesuit Hollywood. Sure. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this new movie called God and Country is based on a book by Catherine Stewart. Now, despite her waspy sounding name, she is of a Jewish background. Now, her husband is Catholic. Now, she's Jewish and her husband's Catholic.
Yep. Well, remember the Stuarts of England. The Stuarts were always, for the most part, pro-Catholic, or pro-Catholic. So that's the typical scourge of the Stuarts, and that's why the Stuarts were prevented from sitting on the throne of England after the turn of the century in the 1700s. Okay, so you're talking about 300 years ago, or thereabouts, 320 years ago. Right. So Matt Stewart, her husband, is Roman Catholic, but she herself is Jewish. So anyhow, this movie of God and Country just came out, as I said, last month, and it's about the rise of the Christian right in America, and they go back to at least the 1950s. And according to the film, and I guess according to Stewart's book, a major watershed moment in America was Brown versus Board of Education, 1954, so 70 years ago. So this angered a number of whites in the South, and they said, "Wait a second, why are they shoving this integration?" And it also angered a lot of Black Bible-believing Christian people, because they did not want to be forcefully integrated with the whites, because they knew they would lose their culture. And I have a whole couple pages on this from a Black minister in a book called Race and Reason by Carlton Putnam, who was the founder of Delta Airlines. And I've read that on the radio on several times here. Maybe I should read it again to show you that he doesn't want racial integration. Miscegenation destroys his people. Same position of the Christian man named Manning Johnson, who was murdered, run off the road when he took a stand against us in the 50s, I believe. So that's right. All we ever hear is the outrage of the whites. The whites didn't want this. Whites didn't want that. The blacks didn't want it either. And it was shoved down our throats by the Jesuits in control of the Supreme Court and the prosecuting attorneys in the horrible, terrible Brown versus Board of Education case, which was a case that sat in equity of the district court there. Hey, George.
Okay, so yes, and I know we've talked about Brown versus Board of Education, and so the lead attorney for that was
Thurgood Marshall.
Yes, Thurgood Marshall. Yes,
the mulatto Thurgood Marshall, who hated white people and was a socialist and a host of other evil things.
And of course, however, the lead attorney on it, as I said, was Thurgood Marshall. But the attorney who actually prepared the case was Jack Greenberg.
So he was a Jew. So here you have a left-wing socialist communist Jew. Wasn't Jack Greenberg associated with Jesuit Georgetown University?
Well, no, he was actually an adjunct professor at St. Louis University.
Okay, so he's an adjunct professor at St. Louis University, which is another Jesuit university. And that's also the university that gives the award known as the Sword of Ignatius Loyola to certain individuals having really fulfilled the purposes of the Jesuit order's counter-reformation, like Dirty Harry Truman and some others. But go ahead, George.
Well, just to name a few, you're talking about the Sword of Loyola. You're talking about Bob Newhart, the actor, comedian. You mentioned Harry Truman, Jim Henning of the Muppets. Hoover. J. Edgar Hoover also received the Sword of Loyola.
Hoover, yes, very good. So here's Knight of Malta, 33rd degree Freemason, J. Edgar Hoover, apostate sodomite Protestant, getting the Sword of Ignatius Loyola from the Jesuits of St. Louis University. I want the listeners to know these connections because it further proves the Jesuits run both sides of every agitation. Go ahead, George.
So, well, anyhow, so speaking of agitations, I just want to mention a couple more trivial items. Last week, the actor and comedian, actor, singer / comedian Steve Lawrence died, who was born Sidney Leibowitz.
So Steve Lawrence was another Hollywood Jew entertainer that was another left-winger, communist, right?
Yes, and he was good friend. Although technically speaking, he was not part of the Rat Pack. He was good friends with Frank Sinatra and Gene Kelly.
All of them left-wing socialist communists. Because you can't be in Hollywood unless you're a socialist communist. You can't be big in entertainment unless you are. Those that are not are very few and far between. And they're generally always white and they're never black or Jewish or Hispanic.
Yes, and so if your politics are somewhat right of center, you generally speaking have to keep a low profile.
Yeah. In other words, you don't have any freedom of speech. Another reason why we shouldn't patronize their movies. We should watch their documentaries, but forget their movies. I mean, it just enriches them in their wickedness and in their sin.
Well, as I said, Steve Lawrence just died the other day at the age of 88. And he, as I said, he's friends with Frank Sinatra and Gene Kelly. And, he was a decent singer, but, I guess Frank Sinatra liked cavorting with these Jews like Steve Lawrence and Joey Bishop and, that crowd. But when I signed you the other day, no. It wasn't that Sinatra was hanging out with them. They were hanging out with Sinatra.
Well, yeah, they knew the man of power there in the entertainment industry, and they knew he was Irish Catholic, and they knew his mob connections, and they knew he could have reporters beaten and having their legs broken. And, Sinatra was a very powerful and very evil man.
Mm-hmm. And, of course, if you wanted to get a gig, if you want to perform in Vegas or get a recording contract, you had to kiss the right ring.
Yeah, sure did, and he was notorious for that. He was another race mixer. He promoted miscegenation in some of his early movies. I remember watching one of them, and so he did all what the Jesuits wanted him to do. And he was also a friend of Carlo Gambino of the Gambino crime family. So Sinatra was very evil, wicked, heavy on the sin. Danced at Kennedy's wedding, Kennedy's inauguration, pardon me. Yep.
Okay, I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
He performed at JFK's inauguration in 1960. 61.
Yes, so that would have been, yes, January the 20th or thereabouts.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm sure Frank was ambivalent about Jack's death because I'm sure he personally liked him, but hey, he knew the rules.
When you cross the American Pope, you pay. And that's what JFK did. He crossed Francis Cardinal Spellman, and Spellman had him killed. Just that simple. I prove it in my book, Vatican Assassins. Francis Cardinal Spellman oversaw the entire assassination of Kennedy through his agents.
Well, you're talking about the Kennedy family. Well, we're partially talking about I mean,
yeah. Now I don't want to change topic, Jordan. I know, George, you have things you want to cover, so just go ahead. Don't mean to get you off point here.
Well. Okay. Well, if you do, you do. Well, I was just thinking, how many people were married? How many prominent people in politics or entertainment were married into the Kennedy family? Arnold Schwarzenegger was married to Maria Shriver, the daughter of Sergeant Shriver, who was friends with, well, I think she was a Kennedy somehow. Andrew Cuomo was married to one of the Kennedy daughters. So it's basically one big incestuous family.
Yep. Well, it's for political power. That's why they have their political power structure, and they don't want to cross each other because they're related. And they're also subject to the Archbishop of New York City. He is the American Pope. It's Timothy Cardinal Dolan of today.
Now, so yes, you are correct. I do have some topics to cover. So I'll try to get through as many as possible. Speaking of things that happened over the last few days, did you catch Pope Francis's comment about Ukraine? Was it on Saturday or Sunday?
No, I didn't.
Okay, he said Ukraine basically said Ukraine should surrender to Russia. There's no shame in raising the white flag.
Yeah, and Ukraine should surrender to Russia because I control Russia. I control Putin. And we've killed enough Orthodox Ukrainians pursuant to our Council of Trent, where maybe we've seen enough of them killed now. But Putin, but the Pope wants to see as many Orthodox Russians killed as he wants to see Ukrainian Orthodox killed. It's a Council of Trent against the Orthodox, unless, of course, the Orthodox faction is totally under Jesuit control, which a large portion of it is. The leaders are, but they just want to kill off the people. That's why it's been an annihilation.
Okay, so, so could we just pause here for a second regarding the whole Russian-Ukrainian war, which has been going on for just over 2 years. Putin, I guess, launched his invasion on February 24th of 2022, so just over 2 years ago. Now, interestingly enough, it was on that date, 1582, Christopher Clavius, I guess, came out with his so-called Gregorian calendar. It'd be a while before it'd be implemented. So I guess there's some significance about that date. February 24th.
February 1582. And what happened then, George?
Christopher Clavius came out with his Gregorian calendar.
Yes.
Now, it wouldn't be until later on that year in October that it would be implemented in the Catholic countries. It'd be a while before it'd be implemented in Protestant or even Orthodox countries.
That's right. Britain implemented it in 1754, I believe. So here you have a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant empire adopting the Jesuit calendar. Christopher Clavius's calendar. This tells you that at the time in 1754, the Jesuits ran Great Britain. And I believe the king at the time was King George II. King George III comes to power in 1760. Go ahead, George.
Okay, so I just wanted, that raises a question. Now, I know this may seem like a silly one, but why would the Pope, the head of the Catholic Church, be interested in any political event in Russia or Ukraine, particularly in an ostensibly non-Catholic country? I just thought he was the spiritual leader of the Catholic Church.
Oh, no. As you know, George, I think you're baiting me for this answer, is that it's all about the doctrine of the temporal power. That's all the Pope is concerned about. Political temporal power over the nations. That's all he wants, to rule all nations. because he claims he has the right to, because he's the vicar of Christ who will one day rule all nations.
Okay, so so we're talking about these comments that the Pope was making about Ukraine. So I just want to, do you think Volodymyr Zelensky will surrender?
Zelensky will do what he's told to do, or he'll get removed. Just like Kennedy, just like Joseph Stalin. They'll get removed if they become disobedient. It's like Reagan, who was shot for becoming disobedient. That's why they have the international intelligence community, carry out the assassinations to keep the heads of state in line and the political parties in line. So Zelensky is just another Jew busy serving the Pope of Rome, and he will do exactly what he's told. Now, if that means surrender, it means surrender. If it means going on, it means going on. But either way, he's going to do what the Pope tells him to do.
Okay, so that raises the question. So a while ago, we were talking about Joe Biden's State of the Union address, in which he made reference to this girl, this nursing student at the University of Georgia at Athens, Laken Riley, not Lincoln Riley. And as I said, she was murdered by, a savage, an alien.
Yeah, she was murdered by a Hispanic Roman Catholic savage, alien invader, brought in here by the Jesuit papacy to do exactly that. One guy on the YouTube I watched said since Biden's been in office, there have been 61 murders of people in this country, and I would imagine most all of them are white, because they got to kill the whites to drive the whites into the new right. And so 61 have been murdered, and they're doing a good job. They just need to keep it up, and it will further justify the creation of the new right. So that's why they brought all these Hispanic invaders in here that are Roman Catholic, loyal to the priests, and they don't know, these Hispanic invaders don't know that when the new right comes to power, they're finished. They will be rounded up, and they will be sent to the camps, and it's going to be death for millions of them. But then again, they're here illegally. They don't belong here. And so they've taken a risk, and they're going to lose in the end. Because the new right will be a combination of Roman Catholics leading it and apostate Protestants that will go along with it. And that's according to a book, the book you mentioned, George. And there's another book I have called The Neo-Catholics Implementing Christian Nationalism in North America by Betty Claremont. And it should be said, implementing Roman Catholic nationalism in America, because Catholicism is not Christian, hasn't been Christian, never will be. So that's what they're doing. That's their end game. Once we see the end game, then we can understand all these events in the news. They make perfect sense. Go ahead, George.
Okay. Well, speaking of agitation, so we talked about this, Blake and Riley. We talked about this movie that's come out that's produced by Rob Reiner and is based on the book by Catherine Stewart, who are Jewish. They're talking about the scourge of Christian nationalism in America, and what they could do to.
Remember, that's a nebulous term. Christian nationalism. What is that? Is that Protestant and Baptist nationalism? Because if it is, that nationalism secured to us the freest country in world history. That Protestant and Baptist Calvinistic nationalism secured freedom of conscience, speech, and press. That Calvinistic Protestant and Baptist nationalism gave a place for the Jews to flee to live here unmolested. So why would a Jew go against historic Protestant and Baptist Calvinist nationalism? Why would he do that? Because he's told to unite all the apostate Protestants using the Westcott and Hort Greek text and all these phony baloney Roman Catholic Bibles, to unite them with the papacy in the coming new right. And so this left-wing socialist, communist, Masonic Jew of Hollywood is indirectly building the new right, and I maintain that he knows it, just as the Southern Poverty Law Center is doing it, just as the Anti-Defamation League is doing it. They're all working for Rome and creating the new right.
Okay, well, speaking of agitation, speaking of communist agitation, We talked about Georgia. We talked about this movie. But of course, I need to talk. Let's take a blast from the past. Now, I realize she hasn't been significant in about 50 years or so. But do you remember Angela Davis?
Of course. I think you sent me the link. Yeah. Angela Davis,
Okay, so
left-wing socialist communist mulatta. She was not entirely black. She was a light-skinned black, so she's a mulatta. And as I've said many times, the mulattoes and the mulattas hate white people much more than normal straight blacks do. And that's another reason why the Jesuits are promoting miscegenation, because the offspring will really hate the white people, like Barry Davis Obama, and like a host of others. But go ahead, George.
Okay, so Angela Davis, who's just turned 80 years old on January 26th, I think she's now retired, but she was a professor at University of California, Santa Cruz. She got an undergrad degree from Brandeis in Massachusetts. She also got a degree.
So she got her undergraduate from the liberal, leftist, socialist, communist, Jewish university called Brandeis University. Okay, go ahead. Louis Brandeis being the first member of the Supreme Court. Louis Brandeis being the one who handed down, who gave the opinion in the wicked and awful and apex decision called the Erie decision of April 25th, 1938. So go ahead, George.
Yes, that same Lou Brandeis. Now, it's interesting. Brandeis and Boston University have a matriculation agreement with Boston College. What that means is
Boston College or Boston University?
Okay, so all the colleges in the Boston, Mass area, Boston College, Boston University, Brandeis, Wellesley, they all have a matriculation agreement, meaning if you're accepted into one, you're accepted into all. Anyhow, so Davis got her undergrad degree from Brandeis, as I said, and she spent the bulk of her academic career teaching Black studies at the University of California, Santa Cruz. I think she's now retired. Now, why do I bring her up?
Teach blacks how much they should hate white people, because the white people never did anything good for any of the blacks. That's their general theme. So go ahead.
Well, I want to respond to that, but just in a moment. So last year, in January of 2023, she received an accolade, not an award, but she had a dinner in her honor at Loyola Marymount, Los Angeles. And the first time she spoke at that campus was back in 1969, so 55 years ago.
And is that a Jesuit school, George?
It's a Jesuit school.
Thank you.
Okay, so she didn't say at that speech, but she's mentioned in previous speeches, she has been firmly committed to the principles of not only social justice, but racial justice and racial equity. I have no idea what that means.
What that means. But we also must remember, as you pointed out, the whole socialist communist movement under the guise of social justice was started by a Jesuit priest named Luigi Tapparelli. So anybody advocating social justice is advocating Jesuit, socialist, communist doctrines, which in the end are anti-white and pro-black.
Yes. Now, I just want to respond to something I brought up last week, and I don't think anybody called me on. I was being facetious when I was talking about Sweden, why they need to atone for the racist past. After all, they had slavery for centuries and Jim Crow laws, and poor blacks had to work in the cotton fields of southern Sweden. I was joking.
Yeah, I knew you were, but I didn't know if the listeners would know that, because many listeners are not aware of the history of Sweden and would know that was just said in jest. So thank you, George.
Okay. Well, having said that, but I brought this up before, but I was recently last week. But why is there this perception that in countries like Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland, Germany, they have this perception of having institutionalized and systemic racism? and
I'll tell you why. Because they're white. You must accuse any white nation of systemic racism, and racism means hating the blacks. That's the definition of racism. Well, how can you hate them if they're not in your country? And how can you hate them if you have hundreds of years of history of a white Saxon race with a specific language and a specific borders of a country? How can you have systemic racism against people that are 1,000 miles away to the south in Africa or to the east as Asians? It's all about attacking the historic white Protestant nations to get them to feel ashamed that they're white, and then to welcome in these blacks and Asians and Hispanics and Arabs and others for the miscegenation of their people, for the destruction of historic white nations. And when you destroy historic white nations, they were only Protestant for the most part, then you destroy the Reformation. So that's the program for all historic Western white Protestant nations of today. Go ahead, George.
Okay. Well, yeah. So I can understand how people can possibly make an argument for that, in the United States, because we did have slavery in this country and other countries. Okay, but however, how can you possibly?
But remember, George, slavery is not a sin. To have slaves is not a sin. To be a slave is not a sin. The Bible is clear. Nowhere in the Bible is the institution of slavery condemned. Now that's a big pill for people to swallow. I had to tell a guy that this last Sunday. He attacked me, and I said, well, show me. I'll show you in Colossians chapter 1 how masters are to treat their servants and servants to obey their masters. Nowhere do we find in the New Testament a call for radical emancipation of slaves. We have a gradual emancipation in 1 Corinthians 7:21. If you may be made free, use it rather. But we have to stop giving these leftist, socialist, communists the day in agreeing with them that slavery was evil. If slavery was evil, it was the way the masters treated the slaves. It's not the institution itself, according to the Bible.
Oh, okay. Can I just address that? Sure. Now, slavery has existed for thousands of years, practically every civilization. Now, what was different from, say, what was practiced in, say, developed U.S. and, say, the colonial period is that it was, generally speaking, done usually as, you're a prisoner of war, or you were a prisoner of some sort. You committed a crime, so you're sentenced to
debt. Yes,
or debt. But there, for the most part, was never a racial component to it. Now, but speaking of that,
George, there was a racial component to it, most assuredly, because remember the North Africans went up and kidnapped the white Irish out of Ireland and brought them down to Morocco and those other places and made them slaves there. So it was a racial. In fact, much of it is racial. And remember, at the time of Christ, there were 60 million slaves in the Roman Empire. And yet Jesus Christ never called for the radical emancipation and abolition of slavery. Never.
Okay, so, well, thank you for the correction. Well, yes, there was a racial component, but it's just like, okay, so how we've been taught, or how I was taught, it was that what was practiced in the United States or the colonial period is that it was you had these happy, free, and prosperous blacks over in Africa who were kidnapped by these evil white men, the English, the Dutch, the Portuguese, the Spanish, and they're taken to the New World, to the Americas, and then they were forced, into this horrible life. And in colonial America and in the antebellum South, the pre-American Civil War South, you had all these white people who were just simply trying to oppress the blacks. And even after the war between the states, you had most whites who didn't like blacks having freedom. So they did everything they could to suppress them by imposing these Jim Crow laws.
And also the whites who were becoming predominant in the North did not allow the blacks to go north. They didn't want them north. They would be competing for their jobs. And so now it was a weight, a burden on the labor market in the North if the blacks from the South would come up. So they didn't want them. The white Roman Catholics, I was raised with white Roman Catholics. They hate blacks. Every black man they ever talked about was a nigger. And my father said, that's a term we do not use in this house. So I was raised around that. I know exactly how it was. And of course, the Martin Luther King was right. That communist was right when he said after the war, they never gave us any land. If the North was that concerned about slavery, they would have given the blacks their own portion of land to start their own country, but they did not. So that shows you the terms of Malcolm X when he said there's more racism and prejudice in the North than there is in the South. He was absolutely right, because the North was becoming primarily Catholic, and the South, particularly the Protestant Southern nations, were always benevolent and just with their servants as they were gradually emancipating them, specifically Virginia. But you got to always compare the two, the southern blacks, the southern states that were Catholic, like Louisiana, like Florida, and others, how they most assuredly mistreated their slaves, versus the slave states of South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, and Georgia, how generally they did not mistreat their slaves and they were gradually emancipating them.
Yep. Okay, so well, I'm sorry, I got derailed. So yeah, so as I said, Angela Davis was at Loyola Marymount, Los Angeles last year, receiving a dinner. She didn't receive an award, but she'd been there, first appeared there in 1969. So she had been going there for decades. So the Jesuits were using her, Angela Davis, to foment black and white agitation.
To the end
and communism.
And communism. And of course, she was a lesbian. She's a lesbian, and she also is pro-abortion. So she has no morality whatsoever. And to what end were they promoting this agitation, George? To what end did Angela Davis do this? And the Black Panthers, which she was affiliated with, and some others. What's the end? What's the end game? We must always ask ourselves that. It's not black supremacy. It's not the blacks taking over. It's not the blacks having America. That's not the end game. But go ahead, George.
Well, there are probably several components to it. One, as I said, she was a professor for decades, basically to further, I guess, poison academia. As I said, she was a professor at University of California. Now, by the way, there are 3 tiers of higher education in California. There's the University of California, UC, there's CSU, Cal State, and there's community colleges. The governor of California is on the board of regents. They're like the directors of the UC. So currently that would be Gavin Newsom. So in other words, the Jesuits and the Vatican, they run the University of California as they do all education in the world. So one of the ends was to further communize higher education, as if it weren't that way already. Also, it was her program at University of California was one of the first to actually teach Black studies or the ethnic studies in California and in the country. Now, I just wanted to quickly address that. I actually had to do that in order to graduate. I had to take a couple of ethnic studies courses. And I don't mean to be rehashing old material, but basically, ethnic studies is basically a code word for a survey into how bad the white man is and how badly he's treated.
Of course. That started way back in the 60s, George. I remember when I was in high school, it was a shame to be white. That's a terrible thing to be white. Look what all we did to all these blacks and all these Indians. There was a constant brainwash put upon us, and we didn't have any white men of any learning and any concern for us that would step in and say, wait a second, that's not the truth. The blacks have fared higher in this country than any other country in the world because it's historically white, Protestant, Baptist, and Calvinistic. That's why. So they don't want to give us credit for that.
Well, something they've been talking about for decades are reparations for slavery. Okay, all right. There's where do I begin?
How about reparations for the Inquisition? How about reparations for the Crusades? How about that? How about reparations for the Third Reich? How about reparations for all the wars that the papacy has gotten us in after March 9th, 1933? How about that? We can't have any pro-white reparations, can we? But we can break the white people. We can break this government continually, even more so, for the purpose of driving the whites to the new right. Once we break it, we just got to give more and more to the blacks. We give more and more affirmative action, more and more free education, more and more free scholarships. So it gives them a place of supremacy where they can occupy the professions in the country and really exercise their racism and hatred towards whites when they get to be judges and policemen and mayors and so on. And that's what they do. And one of their first evidences of their racism and prejudice, you got to find a white wife. That has nothing to do with love. It's all about hatred for the white people, the white race. And when I can lay down your white women, that's when I'm really superior to you, white boy. And I've watched it for 55 years.
Okay, well, the Vice President, Kamala Harris, it's hard to say what her ethnic background is. She's part East Indian, part black, part white. But on her father's side, she has Irish blood in her. And it turns out some of her ancestors owned slaves. Mm-hmm. So I just wondering, does she owe should she pay reparations? So she does.
Because she's got a little black blood in her. She's okay. She passes the test. Reparation is only for whites, George. Don't you get that? It's a racist ideology intended to destroy the whites of the Reformation.
Okay, I'm sorry. I just need to get a quick drink of water. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. So back to what I was saying. Now, I had received a request a while ago, several months ago, for one of the listeners in Kansas, John, who lives in Johnson County. And I just want to make, he's made requests before. And there's a church, I guess in Kansas City, Missouri, called IHOP KC, International House of Prayer, not International House of Pancake. And the pastor there is a fellow by the name of Mike Bickle, Bickel. And he's Pentecostal, and I'm not even going to get into his theology, but I guess it's one of the largest congregations in KC. They have thousands of people that attend there. Well, I bring this up for a couple of reasons. One, back in, I guess, was it 2016? I don't have I guess it was, the story was from Charisma News back on the date is June the 11th, 2016. Bickle and a group of other Protestant ministers from North America and Europe had an audience with Pope Francis. They met for a couple hours, and I guess they prayed together, and it came back to the United States.
Oh, goody. Tell me, how can you be Protestant, protest these awful claims of the Pope, and go see him? I mean, that's the last one person I want to see. He's a forerunner of the Antichrist. He's holding the place of Antichrist till the final Pope comes along. But who would want to go see him? Who would want to go tour the Vatican and pay all that money to see that abomination? Go ahead, George.
Well, I don't know. Maybe he just wanted a nice Italian dinner.
It could be, which I had one last week. It was very good. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. But I sure you could have got one a little bit closer to home. Well, they have nice artwork in the Vatican, and so maybe he was a tourist.
Oh, goody. All those naked rear ends and all that stuff of those little angels, all that perversion Vatican artwork, yeah. Mm-hmm. It's awful. It'll be a great day when the 10 kings of the Antichrist destroy Rome and the Vatican. And they're going to do it in Revelation 17 where the 10 kings will destroy that great city, and that will be a great day, of which, of course, we shall see from heaven as we're with the Lord Jesus Christ in our glorified bodies. Go ahead.
Okay, so anyhow, so Mr. Bickle, as I said, he got together with a group of other ministers from Europe, Canada, U.S., and just to go hang out with the Pope. And his Bickle's comments were, well, we may have differences in certain practices and beliefs, but we all essentially worship the one true God. So anyhow, however, there's something else I need to mention about Mr. Bickle, Mike Bickle, is that he's been accused of...
Now, is this guy white? Is he black? What is he?
He's white.
Okay.
He's white. He was born July the 17th, 1955, so he's almost 70 years old. 60. He's been accused of adultery and of having an affair with a girl who's 14 at the time. This is back in the 1980s. So she was roughly 10 years his junior at the time. So there seems to be a nexus between spiritual fornication and physical fornication.
That's right. First comes heresy, and then comes immorality, in that order. If it's true. It may not be true, but if it is true.
Okay, so, well, I believe he has stepped down from the church until they've investigated this. Now, I remember back during the 1980s, you had all these televangelist scandals. You had Jim Bakker, Jimmy Swaggart, who were doing committing adultery. Swaggart had an affair with had involvement with a prostitute. So that, I wasn't a believer at the time, but that soured me on organized religion. And I realized that...
Did they ever report on the adulteries of the priests, of the bishops, of the cardinals? Did they ever report on Cardinal Bernardin and his mass murders? Report on that about him? Member of the Council on Foreign Relations? Oh no, the papacy is untouchable. They cannot be touched. And if they're ever accused, make sure you know that no cardinal will ever be put on trial in this country. Go ahead.
Or any other country. Like you recently had George Cardinal Pell in Australia.
Yeah, was he tried? Did he go to trial?
His victim died just before the trial.
Isn't that clever? Mm-hmm. So we now have no witness, no evidence, so we have to let him go. Yep.
So, you had, Bernard Cardinal Law, who was the Archbishop of Boston, Massachusetts, which was the whole impetus of the movie Spotlight. He, back in 2001, 2002, he ended up absconding back to the Vatican. He was invited back there at the behest of John Paul II at the time. And that's where you're the remainder of his life.
So he never gets extradited either, does he? There's no extradition out of Vatican City. So he never gets sent back to America to face charges, does he?
Well, he doesn't. Now, this is something most people don't know. If you're a cardinal, you're basically given diplomatic immunity. So that means you have a get out of jail free card, literally. And
well, they're agents for the Pope, and the Pope is a king, and a king is a sovereign in the law, and a sovereign in the law cannot be sued. And the cardinals participate in his power when they're made a cardinal, and so they are now above any sort of prosecution.
Okay, so technically speaking, if you're a cardinal, you can't even get a traffic ticket.
Right. That's right.
So
he's a diplomat on the part of the papacy. And there are, I think, 11 cardinals in this country. Go ahead, George.
Okay, so I just mentioned Mike Bickle. So, it's possible. Okay, so these accusations, there are at least two accusations. One is committing adultery with a woman who's an adult, and he was involved the 1980s with a girl who was a minor, 14. So that.
What's wrong with that, George? Are you trying to impose right-wing morality on me? Is that what you're trying to do, George? Everything should be okay. I'm okay, you're okay. George, come on now. See, that's where all of this existentialism's taken us. No morality, judges ultimately brings a judgment of God on the country, and it goes to war and it's defeated. Right, Brother George?
Well, I suppose. But, something I just wanted to mention on a more local level. Well, I already mentioned a local news item about this community college instructor at the Santa Rosa Junior College. Back, was it in May of 2021, May the 6th, of almost 3 years ago, there was a local supervisor, a county board of supervisors named James Gore, put out a video. Now, as I said before, in California, we have 58 counties, and each county has a 5-member board of supervisors. They're the ones who run the respective counties in the state. And as I said, Gore gave this video during the so-called COVID pandemic, in which he was proudly advertising the fact that he had got his COVID shot, and he received it from the health office in Dari Mace. We've spoken about Mace before. So why do I bring this up? And in this video, he says, "Hi, I'm James Gore, and I represent such district." And he said, "Well, I'm going to do my part to help in this pandemic by getting my COVID shot, and I would encourage you to do likewise." So he took off his coat and he rolled up his shirt, and he had a tattoo of some sort. I couldn't make it out. Well, that's immaterial. However, what is material is just before Mace gave him the shot, he held out his hand and flashed what appeared to be a gang sign. It took out his hand, or his right hand, and held his middle three fingers inside, and held up his thumb and lowered his pinky, as if you're holding a telephone. So I looked this up, and I've seen it before. That is a famous Masonic hand gesture. So why would he do that?
Well, let all the brothers know that he's one of them, and he's doing the will of the high Masonic leaders, subject to the Pope.
Okay. Okay. So he may not know that.
He may not, or he may. We don't know.
Okay, so Gore was born in 1973, so he's about 50 years old. Odds are he's going to run for another office after this. Maybe a state legislature, maybe Congress, who knows? But he's proven himself to be a team player.
Is this Al Gore you're talking about?
James Gore. Now, I don't know if they're, well,
because Al Gore wasn't born in any 19 whatever, so I just wanted to clarify that for the listener.
Okay, now Al Gore, the former senator and vice president and presidential candidate from Tennessee. Now, who knows? Odds are they're related. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Could be. We don't know. The important thing is that they're advocating essentially the same religious doctrines of socialist communism, universal equality, which means black supremacy over whites, lesbianism, feminism, and all the other Jesuitisms that are busy destroying Western civilization. I mean, when are they going to come out and start advocating what really preserves a nation and is true nationalism, and therefore in that context to have prosperity and happiness and growth? Who's going to do that? He's not going to be the new right. Go ahead, George.
Oh, by the way, I know, yes, I thought we closed the book on Angela Davis, and I was just looking at my notes. Something I forgot to mention. She is also daughter of the Eastern Star.
Oh, yeah, is she? Just like that mulatto in the 1954, she told Rosa Parks. She's Eastern Star, too. So we see the Masonic connection to the whole civil rights movement, and Rosa Parks, who's a mulatta, who refuses to get to the end of the bus, and good old Angela Davis, who's another mulatta, and stoking the hatred for white men among all blacks. Wonderful. And that's just what the papacy wants, to create the new right, which will be white and apostate, Protestant, and Catholic.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I didn't. You had asked me the question. So, what is the end of having of the Vatican creating characters like Angel Davis? What is the end goal? What's the punchline?
Yeah.
Well, I think you just answered my question for yourself.
Well, thank you, George. I kind of wanted you to do that. Maybe I would have it wrong. Maybe you could correct me on that, Pooh. What's the end game? What's the punchline, George?
Well, I try not to work any harder than I have to.
No, you're doing fine, George. I enjoy you.
Oh, okay.
You work real hard, but go ahead.
Well, okay, well, you see, okay, you had to ask yourself, what is the purpose of an Angela Davis or Jesse Jackson or a TV show like All in the Family? Well, it's partial agitation. Is irritation, is anger. What is the purpose of a Colin Kaepernick for not standing for the national anthem?
Another mulatto. That's right. Another mulatto.
Well,
that's right. Mm-hmm.
Another Prince Hall Freemason.
Mulatto, Prince Hall Freemason. Charles Barkley, another mulatto. Prince Hall Freemason with his white wife. Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. So, well, it's to make white people in general, white men in particular, angry, whether you're Baptist, Protestant, or Catholic. They say, how dare? Okay, well, the whole idea of the profession, we've talked about professional sports, and particularly the NFL and bread and circuses and all that nonsense. But to the average American, regardless of his religious affiliation or political affiliation, he's working himself to death. He just wants to veg for a few hours on the weekend and just watch a stupid game and drink his beer.
That's right.
And I don't need this clown, Colin Kaepernick or Black Lives Matter or whatever, interfering with
George Floyd, who's not dead, who wasn't killed. Otherwise, he'd have had an open coffin. But go ahead, George.
Okay, so if you're talking about Joe Sixpack, he says, you know what? I'm working myself to death, and I just need a few hours of entertainment over the weekend. And I don't want somebody like Colin Kaepernick or Black Lives Matter or whatever engaging in their protests. If they want to do that, that's fine, but not while you're on the field or on the court or whatever. And what they're doing is you're politicizing people who otherwise were not politicized. You have people who basically could care less about race or racism or anything like that, or the color of their skin. Now it's an issue.
Well, now it's more than the color of their skin. Let's not do that. Race is much more than the color of the skin. It's cranial capacity, facial complexions, length of their members, of their arms, fingers, whatever, their abilities and physical things. It's a racial matter. It's not just a skin color matter. Different kind of hair, flaring nostrils, slender nose, wide nose. I mean, all these are racial characteristics. That it's not just simply skin color, which is another propaganda, that the only difference between the races is the skin color. That's nonsense. Go ahead, George.
Okay, so now with a figure like an Angela Davis or Colin Kaepernick or fill in the blank, is they take people, millions of people, tens of millions of people who were non-partisan, non-political. They say, you know what, enough is enough. I think I'm going to support somebody like a Donald Trump because he speaks my language.
Yep. And Trump will advocate many right things. Just like Hitler advocated many right things. Just like Lenin advocated many right things. Yeah, go ahead.
Or, if you're talking outside the United States, that's why if I'm Hungary. Now, if I were living in Hungary, I'd probably be supporting Viktor Orban. Of
course. I don't want the savage Muslims coming in my country. Of course not. Of course you would. Did we vote to bring all these savage Muslims in here? that hate us according to their Sharia law and their Quran. I didn't vote to bring them in here. It was done to us by District of Columbia, overseeing its commander-in-chief, while you have the papal apostolic delegate there to tell the commander-in-chief what the Pope's telling him to do. And if you don't do it, well, then we're going to have a problem. So all the commander-in-chiefs in District of Columbia, aka the United States, are doing exactly what the papacy tells them to do, which includes forced race mixing, miscegenation by forced driving up of this invasion of these aliens into this country. And that's exactly what Robert Dabney wrote in his work, A Defense of Virginia in the South, late in the book. The purpose of our conquerors is to mix the blood of the freemen of Virginia with that corrupt stream of the fens of Africa, so that we will never ever cause the power structure, this white power structure, to ever shake in their boots ever again. Something along those lines, but that's how he ends up towards the end of his book.
Well, funny you should mention Robert Dabney. He was Stonewall Jackson's chief of staff, and prior to that, he had actually been Dabney had been Jackson's pastor. And I've only read a few of Dabney's work, one of which he wrote near the end of his life was called The Perils of Popery. And
Perils of Popery. Okay.
Are you familiar with that?
No, I'm not.
And he said, well, basically, he was talking about the rise of rationalism in northern schools in the U.S. And, or as a more accurate term, is irrationalism. It basically, so basically, this is I'm probably not giving an accurate definition, but this has started out in apostate German Lutheranism. They basically said, well, you can't take the Bible literally. You need to allegorize it, meaning everything is just symbolic. And
by the way, if I can interrupt, the rationalism imposed in Lutheranism, according to Luigi De Santis, in his great work Popery Puseyism of E.B. Pusey in England, Popery Puseyism and Popery Puseyism and Jesuitism, which I have an original copy, says that the Jesuits are responsible for the rationalism of Germany. And he says that they're like in 1870, right there.
Okay, so about 150 years ago. Okay, so when it started out in Germany, spread to the rest of Europe and to England and then the United States. And it started out in the Northeast in the apostate northern seminaries like Harvard, like Princeton, and places like that. Then it spread to the rest of the United States.
Yep.
So basically, rationalism basically says you cannot take the Bible literally.
And that goes back to Origen in his allegorical approach to the Bible. And Origen was an evil, wicked heretic, not a Christian, out of Alexandria, Egypt. Go ahead.
Okay, so he was not. I don't think Dabney was involved with the whole Bible translation debate, but this is a correlated topic because one of the things that Edward F. Hills mentioned in his book, The King James Defended, back in the 1950s, is the reason why he defends the 1611 authorized version as opposed to the others, such as the American Standard of 1901 or the Revised Standard of 1881, is because those texts were based on West Concorde's corrupt Alexandrian texts, which would basically advocated rationalism.
It's a pro-Jerome's Latin Vulgate. That's another proof that the Jesuits were behind the secret text. Go ahead.
Okay, so but getting back to Dabney, he said they're trying. Okay, the Jesuits and the Vatican basically had just destroyed the United States militarily in the war between the states. Now they're trying to do it theologically and intellectually through rationalism.
Yep. To employ rationalism, you have to abolish the Bible.
Okay.
Otherwise, the religion of rationalism cannot.
Can I just mention?
Yeah, go ahead, George.
Okay, I know we've been going on over an hour, but there's something that's been in my hopper for a while, so I'll just end on this note. It has to do with neuro-linguistic programming and mesmerism. Now, I know those may sound like disparate topics, but they're correlated. Now, please bear with me a moment. Can you indulge me, brother?
Of course, my brother.
Okay. So, if you look up neurolinguistic programming, you may not be familiar with this language, but you'll be familiar with the concept. Now, if you look this up on Wikipedia, they'll say it's pseudoscience. It doesn't really have any basis in real science. Well, the two architects of neurolinguistic programming, NLP, are Richard Bandler and John Grinder. They wrote a book called The Structure Magic in 1975, so almost half a century ago. So who were Richard Bandler and John Grinder? Well,
I don't know, George. Who are they?
well, funny you should ask. Okay, I have my notes here, but my internet is not working. Oh, okay, here it is. Richard Bandler is still alive. He was born in 1950. He actually got his undergrad degree from Lone Mountain College in San Francisco, which was later taken over by University of San Francisco, which is Jesuit.
Yep.
And his colleague, John Grinder, was born in 1940. So he born January 10th. They're both still alive. So he's 84 years old. He got his master's degree from University of San Francisco.
Oh, the good old Jebbies.
Okay, so
here are these two Jesuit coadjutors advocating a doctrine for the destruction of white Protestant America, abandoning the Bible and embracing this new religion. Go ahead.
Well, it's a little bit more complicated than that. He's actually still alive. He actually got his undergrad degree from University of San Francisco, and after he got his degree in 1962, he joined the Army and he was assigned to Special Forces, the Intelligence Division.
Ah, so could that possibly be a connection to the CIA and intelligence operations here once he gets out? Could it be possibly?
Well, that sounds like an unfounded conspiracy theory. Well, anyhow, moving along, moving along, and it's just a pure coincidence. So if you want to shut people down and say, one, that's a coincidence, and two, that sounds like an unfounded conspiracy theory, works like a charm. Okay, so
can never accept any kind of conspiratorial facts whatsoever. That would be against the religion of the papacy and their agents here, because there can be no conspiracy. Man is basically good. Go ahead.
Okay, so the book was, as I said, peddled back in the 1970s is fluff. It's just like, well, through neurolinguistic program, you can basically do almost anything. You can overcome a phobia, you can quit smoking, you can lose weight, whatever. But so what they do is use the power of suggestion and, well, basically positive thinking, to borrow a term from Norman Vincent Peale. So by using certain words, repeating certain words and phrases, you can get people to do almost anything. That's part of hypnotism. Newsreaders have been doing this for decades, generations. So you remember during the whole Corona hoax nonsense, you kept hearing these newsreaders either on television or the radio say, well, cases are up, cases are exploding. The pandemic, the deadly pandemic, the virus, the deadly virus, the deadly COVID virus. Or if you go back, 20 plus years ago after 9/11, people like George W. Bush would say terrorism, deadly terrorism.
So it's Muslim terrorists who did it. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah. So by constantly saying these words and phrases, that's how you create trauma. And this is predates.
You're cutting new gray matter. You're cutting new gray matter so people start to think along those lines. Yeah, just with over and over repetition.
So if you think about it, that's how you learn how to do anything. How you learn a language, how you ride a bicycle, how to play catch with a baseball, whatever. It's through repetition. And this is not necessarily a bad thing. However, it can be used for abuse. Now, so as I said, Bandler actually had an Army intelligence background, and both of them were trained by the Jesuits. I realized, well, move along, nothing to see here. Well, this is nothing new. The Jesuits have been interested in hypnotism for centuries. Now, when I mention hypnotism, people will often dismiss that, oh, that's nothing more than just a parlor trick. Really? Okay. As a matter of fact, another term for hypnotism is mesmerism, named after Franz Anton Mesmer, who lived from the 23rd of May, 1734, died on March the 5th, 1815. So he was about 70 years old when he died. If you look at his background, he specifically said he was trained by the Jesuits in Dillingen in in Austria, or it was the Austro-Hungarian Empire at the time. So
the man Mesmer, from where we get the word mesmerism, was trained by Jesuits, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
And he died just over 200 years ago, back in 1815. So this is something the Jesuits have been studying for centuries. So as I said, people often just...
And they also found out, George, they also found out this: you can't mesmerize anybody if they're reading the Reformation English Bible, the AB 1611 Bible. You can't mesmerize them because their mind's being programmed according to the Word of God, and they can't be mesmerized. So that's another reason to get the Bible out of the culture and out of the schools.
Okay, so why am I talking about people who lived in different centuries, in different continents, basically 150 years apart or 160 years apart? Well, because they're correlated. So the Jesuits are the ultimate hypnotists. They want to mesmerize us through Hollywood.
Yes.
Through television, through music. Now, something I mentioned to you before is...
by the way, that's why they use spells in Hollywood. Hollywood is a wood that the magicians use to make magic wands. And I'll never forget when I learned that lesson. I was playing lead guitar in a band. The other guy, lead rhythm guitar guy, his name was Nick, and Italian Roman Catholic, and his father taught parapsychology at the University of Berkeley, Mr. Nocerino. And I went to pick up one of these crooked sticks that was all lacquered and had certain hieroglyphics in it. And Nick says to me, he says, "Hey, man, don't touch that." I said, "Well, why not?" He says, "They're magic wands. My father makes magic wands for all of his students when he teaches parapsychology." So you have Hollywood and magic and demon activity in all mesmerism. And that's why we have programming mesmerizing on TV.
Well, I think I mentioned this to you before, but one of the songs the Rolling Stones had, arguably their biggest hit was Satisfaction. It came out in 1965, so almost 60 years ago. How does that song start out?
It starts out with a lead guitarist playing a riff.
Okay, and how it goes? Da, 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 da. It's very hypnotic. It's mesmerizing.
Yes, especially when you do it over and over and over again, which is what the blacks of Africa do when they get demon possessed. They're busy beating the drums, and it's over and over and over again, over and over and over again. And pretty soon the demons manifest and they get demon possessed with the witch doctor. It's the same exact thing with the rock and roll music and the noise we have today. It's over and over and over and over. Most songs only have 3 chords. F, B flat, and C, or whatever you want to do, but it's only 3 chords when you break it down. So it's further mesmerizing. That's why classical music is not mesmerizing, and it's good for you, and it's born out of the Reformation.
Okay, well, just talking about the song Satisfaction. If you analyze it, if you don't listen to the bass, to the guitar riff, the da, da, and the drum beat, it's a terrible song. I mean, it's completely pure. I mean, just like a child write this. I mean, I can't get no satisfaction. I can't get no girly action.
It's African. It's the Africanization of the white Protestant English and Scottish and American peoples. That's why they were put upon us after the greatest psych work that they ever pulled, which was the Kennedy assassination. The Beatles and the Rolling Stones, to get all these young people off asking any serious questions and get them all mesmerized with this evil Africanization of the music.
Well, I think I said this to you a few weeks ago. There's a clip where Mick Jagger, the lead singer of the Rolling Stones, Sir Mick Jagger, was doing an interview with Dick Cavett. This was like 1972 or so. And I guess, I don't know the date, but I guess Jagger was doing a concert in New York because that was where Cavett was. And they're chit-chatting about life on the road and touring and all that sort of stuff. And he said, so do you like doing, one of the things that Cavett asked Jagger, and he says, is it hard touring all the time? Spending, sometimes hundreds of days on the road, hundreds of days a year on the road. And he said, yeah, it could be a bitter grind, but, I take care of myself. And, in addition to doing the concerts and recording, I have to do interviews, such as right now. But I've often been asked to do promotions, to do ads. And he said, well, such as, well, I remember last week or last year, this would have been in 1971, I did an ad for the West Virginia Department of Public Health, because I guess it was close, it was in Philadelphia. And he said, encourage the miners to get their tuberculosis shots.
Oh, that's nice.
And he actually
infect them with TB. Good.
Okay, so he had actually done the same. So I guess in the 1960s, like 1965, 66, he'd actually done the same thing in the UK, where he encouraged Welsh miners to get their shots.
Good.
Which seems
so we can find all these young people and attack them so they can't reproduce, and that's just wonderful. Good old Mick.
Well, okay. So, but as I said, when you're talking about Welsh miners in Wales or coal miners in West Virginia, well, they're getting tuberculosis because of their job, not because they allegedly catch a virus or bacteria. But that's a whole nother conversation. So why would they have him? I guess the West Virginia Department of Health and I guess the Welsh Ministry of Health have him do these ads. They said, be sure to get your shots.
Yeah, be sure to get your shots now. Be good slaves. Get your shots so you can die between 60 and 65. And that's right. And come to our medical inquisition so we can cut, burn, drug in, and usher you out of this world into hell. That's their system. Yeah. God forbid you should read the Bible. So we'll get that out of public schools. And God forbid that you should eat in a public square. We get the 10 Commandments out of there. Makes perfect sense, George. Have these idols promote their religion on all these naive young people that never heard a passage of scripture in their life.
Oh, okay. So as it just so happens, I mentioned this to you before, but as it just so happens, almost all your coal miners in the United States, in West Virginia, in Kentucky, in Tennessee, are Scots Irish. And
Scots Irish and historically Protestant and Baptist.
Oh, okay. So they're the ones who are getting sick. They used to call tuberculosis a couple different things besides TB. They call it consumption, yes, and they call it a coal miner's disease.
Yep.
I wonder why.
That's right.
And
now the papacy runs the coal mines. And the papacy controlling the coal mines were responsible for giving all those Protestants black lung, especially out of Virginia and West Virginia, because we got to kill these horrible, terrible Protestant and Baptist people because they fought so hard in the war between the states. So we're going to kill them pell-mell. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. So I know we've been going on a bit long. So, and as it just so happens, I mentioned this to you before, but so coal mining is a dangerous occupation and is done almost exclusively by whites, and whether you're talking about in the British Isles, people of Scots Irish descent, or in the United States, but also electricians. That's a dangerous occupation. As a matter of fact, the average life expectancy for an electrician is 55.
Really?
Yes. Now, as it just so happens, about 99% of those are whites.
Yep. And I'm not one of them because I don't think I could be an electrician. I'm kind of fearful of electricity. Yep. But it's a wonderful science, and it's brought us many wonderful things. And all we need to do is have our own electromagnetic motors to generate electricity, and we can shut down from central power and have our computers or whatever we want to do fueled by right out of our house.
Well, I was just thinking, but if you think about almost all the trades historically, at least in the United States, have been performed by white men.
Right.
Yes, you've had some black mechanics, but generally speaking, white men, your electricians, your plumbers, and so forth. But those are dangerous occupations. They tend to have short life expectancies.
Yep.
I wonder why that is.
Well, I maintain that the AC electrical fields work against your direct current fields in your bodies. So it starts to weaken you and make you more susceptible to disease. AC current is horrible. It should have never been totally developed and put upon us like this. It should be direct current because that's the current in sync with our bodies. So they put AC current everywhere to kill us, slow but sure.
Okay. Well, I've mentioned my father before. He died of colon cancer. Well, no, he didn't die of colon cancer. He died from he got quackicided.
Quackicided. I got to remember that.
Well, so as I said, he was career Air Force. He was born in 1933, died in 1996 at the age of 63. So he was in the Air Force from 1950 to 1972. So after he got out, he did a couple things. He was a driver for Greyhound, but his primary occupation after he got out is he had an appliance repair business. And he got training for that before he got out of the Air Force. He took AC classes, heating and air conditioning classes. And
AC
he ran
everywhere, brother. AC current everywhere. Go ahead.
Okay, so I don't want to talk about the death of my father, but so he was given the diagnosis of colon cancer in 1993 at the age of 60. And so the doctors took his colon out, and for the last few years of his life, he had a colostomy bag. I don't mean to get into my family's business. And so he went back to the doctors about a year or so later. This was actually at Travis Air Force Base in Fairfield, California. It's roughly halfway between San Francisco and Sacramento. And forgive me for boring your audience with all these extraneous details. And they said, well, we're sorry, Mr. Widger, we missed some of the cancer. It had metastasized to your lymph nodes. I said, oh, well, what do you suggest I do? I know, chemo. Oh, what's that?
Oh, goody.
So he said basically he felt as if he had done 15 rounds with Muhammad Ali whenever he got done.
Awful.
I mean, my dad wasn't tall; he was like 5'11", but he had vice grips for hands basically. But he was just he couldn't walk 10 feet after he had one of these sessions, and he couldn't keep. Now he struggled with his weight, but after he had chemo, he had a problem keeping the weight on.
Well, yeah.
And so anyhow,
the office of the medical inquisition, George. That's what I call it. Jesuit Medica in my book, Vatican Assassins, chapter 49. That's all it is. It's a slow death, a slow kill to put you through as much pain and agony as possible because you're a heretic or liberal. And by the way, cancer is a disease for the northern nations on the Tropic of Cancer, not Capricorn. And so that's why they gave it the name Cancer, for the white Protestant nations of the Tropic of Cancer.
Oh, okay. So is this like people from, say, Japan, like Okinawa? They almost never get cancer or heart disease. Or historically, they didn't.
Yep. Well, they're great consumers of seaweed. So that's one of the great things that prevents that from happening.
Okay, so my dad died in 1996 at the age of 63. From basically, he was murdered by his doctors. So, and I was totally oblivious because I thought he was doing the right thing by getting the chemo. And so,
who invented chemo, George? Tell us that one.
Oh, Gordon Zubrod, Charles Gordon Zubrod, who got his undergraduate degree from St. Louis University.
That's right. So here's this guy that's Jesuit trained, comes out with chemotherapy. Dear listener, what more do we need to tell you to show you the Jesuits run the medical inquisition, and especially the treatment of cancer that they've ultimately caused with their injections, vaccines, whatever you want to call it. We are the enemy, and the Pope is the one using the commander-in-chief in District of Columbia to kill us, whether by the medical inquisition, whether financially, whether with war, whether philosophically. It's all a ceaseless war on us white Anglo-Saxon Protestants and Baptists, Calvinistic people, for our termination in fulfilling the Jesuit order's grand design of the Counter-Reformation to destroy it and revert the world back to the Pope's Dark Ages, when the Pope was a universal monarch of the world, which is the end game of the New World Order. All right, Brother George, are we done today? I think we ought to be.
Okay, yes. Sorry for going a little long.
That's all right. We went an hour and a half today. I'm sure my listeners will forgive us as we offer our condolences. So, George, you want to give your final sentences and then give your contact information?
Okay, my final sentences. Well, life without the possibility of parole.
Life without the possibility of parole.
Okay. Oh, that's okay.
Let me say this. Give your final
if people have any questions, comments.
Give your final conclusions, please. Okay.
Okay, so if people have any questions, comments, concerns, critiques, if they'd like to email me and say hello, if they'd like me to cover a topic or go over a topic again, please do so. They can email me at georgewidger1969@gmail.com. That's George, George, Widger, WIDGER1969@gmail.com. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, critiques, please let me know, and I'll do my best to get back to you in a timely manner. Within 24 hours.
Very good. Okay, well, thank you so much, George. Please stay on until I'm finished. So, Brother George and I thank you for tuning in today. I have a book, Vatican Assassins, Wounded in the House of My Friends. You can go to my website, vaticanassassins.org, or 24/7 World Radio, pick up an ebook. Hopefully, I'm going to reprint the book here within a month or two. And appreciate your prayers for George and myself, 2 minutes a day, lifting up holy hands without wrath and doubting, seeking the Lord on our behalf that we might be able to continue to bring you important, valuable information for your edification. And also to send any gift support for this broadcast. You can send a check to RBT, P.O. Box 306, New Manstown, Pennsylvania, 17073. Or you can send through Cash App, which is Eric John Phelps. That's ERICJONPHELPS, a Cash App. Or you can send through PayPal to rbpbdonate@comcast.net, rbpbdonate@comcast.net. Appreciate all your support, appreciate your love, appreciate your support, and we're thankful for you listeners that are taking this information and using it for good purposes, and for yourselves and also for your neighbors, for the church, the body of Christ. And lastly, we pray that George and I will be praying that the Lord will continue to raise our listenership, and that we'll go out and begin to warn of the Jesuit order's intention of imposing the new right through bogus Christian nationalism, which is really Catholic nationalism, that will end in some sort of national socialism that the Jesuits put on Germany and apostate Lutheran Prussia in the 20th century. They want to do the same thing now. So it's my prayer that we will not be suckers for that, and that we continue to advocate our separation, a racial separation of a portion of this country, whether it be a county or a state, to be historically white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, and Baptist once again, that we can have our own nation, and that the Lord would bless us as we separate from what the Jesuits have been ruling now as the Holy Roman 14th Amendment American Empire from 1933 to the present. So until our next broadcast, Lord bless, Maranatha.